They called her a bridge between worlds, a symbol, a story shaped by both truth and myth. Tonight, we explore the biography of Pocahontas. You're listening to Boring Biography, and this is a sleep story designed for deep relaxation and insomnia relief. Settle in, breathe slowly, and let the noise of the day drift away. Pocahontas never ruled an empire, yet her life unfolded at the meeting point of cultures, languages, and uncertain futures. Born into a world of rivers, forests, and oral tradition, she witnessed the quiet collision of two civilizations, not through battles alone, but through gestures, misunderstandings, and fragile moments of contact. Imagine mist rising over the James River, soft footsteps through tall grass, voices carried by the wind between villages and wooden ships. Close your eyes, grow comfortable, and let the story begin. Pocahontas' exact year of birth is not known, though many historians place it around the mid-1590s. Early English accounts suggest that she was still very young at the time of first contact with the Jamestown settlers. In descriptions written shortly after the English arrival, she is portrayed as a child, estimated to be around 10 to 12 years old during the spring of 1608. These accounts consistently emphasize her youth, reinforcing the understanding that she was not yet an adult during the earliest encounters between the Powhatan people and the English colonists. She was the daughter of Chief Powhatan, the paramount leader of Tsenacamaca, a large alliance of approximately 30 Algonquian-speaking groups occupying the Tidewater region of what is now Virginia. Powhatan held authority over numerous subordinate chiefdoms, making him one of the most powerful indigenous leaders in the region. Pocahontas' mother remains largely unknown to history. Her name and background were not recorded by English observers, and surviving information suggests she may not have held a prominent status among Powhatan's wives. Some historical interpretations propose that she may have died during childbirth, though this cannot be confirmed. Accounts from individuals who lived among the Powhatan people indicate that when one of Powhatan's wives gave birth, she was typically returned to her own community, where she would be supported until she remarried. This practice may explain why Pocahontas' mother is largely absent from colonial records. Oral tradition, preserved by descendants of the Powhatan people, particularly among the Mattaponi, holds that Pocahontas' mother was Powhatan's first wife and that Pocahontas was named in her honor. While these traditions cannot be verified through written records, they continue to shape indigenous perspectives on her early life. The name Pocahontas was not her formal name, but a childhood nickname. Contemporary English sources describe it as meaning something akin to playful or mischievous, reflecting her energetic behavior as a child. Descriptions from the Jamestown settlement depict her visiting the fort, engaging in games with the children there, and running freely through the open spaces. These portrayals emphasize her youth and liveliness, presenting her as a child who moved easily between her own community and the English settlement during those early years. Historical accounts suggest that her given name was Matoax, a name that was deliberately concealed from the English for cultural and spiritual reasons. Among the Powhatan people, names were believed to hold power, and revealing a true name was thought to expose a person to harm. It is believed that the English were given only her nickname during her childhood. Later, after she underwent Christian baptism, she adopted the name Rebecca, and only after this transition did she reportedly share her original name with the colonists. In later centuries, Pocahontas was frequently described as a princess, a title that does not accurately reflect Powhatan political structure. While she was deeply favored by her father and held a special place within his household, Powhatan leadership did not pass directly from father to child. Succession followed a matrilineal system in which authority passed first to Powhatan's brothers, then to his sisters, and later to his sisters' children. Sons and daughters of male leaders did not inherit leadership positions. As a result, Pocahontas was never in line to become a ruler, despite her father's prominence. English observers struggled to understand this system of inheritance and often interpreted Powhatan society through European concepts of monarchy. This misunderstanding contributed to later portrayals of Pocahontas as royalty in the European sense. In reality, her status was shaped more by kinship, family affection, and cultural role than by political succession. Her life unfolded within a complex social structure that valued lineage through women, communal authority, and continuity across generations rather than the individual inheritance of power. Pocahontas is most often remembered in connection with the English colonist John Smith, who arrived in Virginia in April 1607 as part of a group of about 100 settlers. The English established a fort on a marshy peninsula along the James River, an area that proved difficult for settlement due to disease, limited resources, and unfamiliar conditions. Over the following months, the colonists experienced frequent encounters with the peoples of Senecomica. Some of these encounters were peaceful and based on exchange, while others were marked by tension, suspicion, and violence as both sides struggled to understand one another's intentions. In December 1607, John Smith was captured while exploring the Chickahominy River. He was taken by a hunting party led by Opechancanoughs, a close relative of Chief Powhatan, and brought to Werowocomoco, the paramount chief's main residence. In Smith's earliest written account from 1608, he described being received with a large feast followed by a lengthy discussion with Powhatan. In this version of events, Pocahontas was not mentioned in connection with his capture, and Smith stated that he first met her several months later. The account focused instead on diplomacy and Powhatan's apparent interest in managing relations with the English. Some historians have suggested that Powhatan may have been attempting to incorporate Smith and the English settlers into his own political structure. By offering Smith authority over a nearby town, Powhatan may have hoped to keep the English close to his capital and under his influence, reducing the threat they posed while also bringing them into an existing network of obligations and alliances. Several years later, however, Smith presented a much more dramatic version of his capture. In 1616, he wrote a letter to Queen Anne of Denmark in advance of Pocahontas's visit to England. In this account, Smith claimed that he had been moments away from execution when Pocahontas intervened, placing herself between him and death. He described her actions as courageous and self-sacrificing, portraying her as a figure of compassion and heroism. Smith expanded on this story again in his later work, published in 1624, where he described being laid upon stones with weapons raised, only to be saved when Pocahontas shielded his head with her own. Modern scholars have debated the accuracy of this later version. Some suggest that Smith embellished the story over time, possibly to enhance his reputation and present Pocahontas as a noble figure worthy of attention at the English court. Others propose that Smith may have misunderstood a ceremonial ritual, interpreting it as an execution rather than a symbolic act intended to adopt him into the Powhatan Confederacy. Not all historians agree with either interpretation, and the lack of independent corroborating evidence has left the event open to continued debate. Despite these uncertainties, early accounts consistently describe Pocahontas as having a friendly relationship with Smith and other colonists. She is remembered as visiting the settlement regularly, playing with children, and moving freely between communities. During periods of severe hunger at Jamestown, She reportedly arrived with companions bringing food and supplies, contributions that helped sustain the colonists during times when starvation was widespread. These acts strengthened her image as a mediator and a familiar presence during the colony's early struggles. As the English settlement expanded, however, relations deteriorated. The Powhatan people increasingly viewed the growing colony as a threat to their land and autonomy, leading to renewed conflict. In late 1609, John Smith was injured in a gunpowder explosion and forced to return to England for medical treatment. The colonists informed the Powhatans that Smith had died, and believing this to be true, Pocahontas stopped visiting Jamestown. It was only years later, when she traveled to England with her husband John Rolfe, that she learned Smith was still alive, bringing a quiet but significant revelation near the end of their shared story. Pocahontas's capture took place during a period of open conflict known as the First Anglo-Powhatan War, a struggle between the Jamestown settlers and the native peoples of the region that began in the latter part of 1609. In the early years of this war, the English colonists gradually secured control of the James River, both at its mouth and farther inland near the falls. This control was strategically important, as the river served as the main route for supplies, trade, and military movement. At the same time, English efforts extended beyond Jamestown, as they sought alliances with native groups who lived on the fringes of Powhatan's authority. One such effort was led by Captain Samuel Argall, who focused his attention on tribes living in the northern reaches of Powhatan's chiefdom. Among these were the Potawatoms, who lived along the Potomac River and did not always remain loyal to Powhatan. Living among them was Henry Spelman, a young Englishman who served as an interpreter and intermediary. In March 1613, Argall learned that Pocahontas was staying in the Potawatomi village of Passapatanzi, where she was under the protection of their leader, the Werowance Iopasis, also known as Japazaws. With Spelman translating, Argall persuaded Iopasis to cooperate in capturing Pocahontas. He did so by promising a military alliance with the English against Powhatan. With the involvement of Iopasis and his wives, Pocahontas was lured onto Argall's ship, the Treasurer. Once aboard, she was taken captive and held for ransom. Argall demanded that Powhatan release English prisoners and return weapons and tools that the colonists claimed had been taken from them. Pocahontas remained in English custody for about a year. During this time, she was kept at the settlement of Henricus, located in what is now Chesterfield County, Virginia. Very little is known in detail about her daily life during this period. Contemporary English accounts described her treatment as courteous and respectful, though later interpretations have differed. Some oral traditions suggest that she may have suffered abuse, while other historians argue that mistreatment would have undermined English diplomatic goals. At the time, the English were vastly outnumbered by native peoples, and they feared retaliation if Pocahontas were harmed, especially while negotiations with Powhatan were ongoing. While living at Henricus, Pocahontas was instructed in Christianity by the settlement's minister, Alexander Whitaker. She was taught religious doctrine and continued learning the English language. Upon her baptism, she adopted the Christian name Rebecca, marking a significant transformation in her public identity and role within English society. In March 1614, tensions reached a breaking point. A violent confrontation erupted along the Pamunkey River, involving hundreds of English colonists and Powhatan warriors. During this period, the English met with a group of senior native leaders at Powhatan's capital, Matchcot. When Powhatan himself arrived, the colonists allowed Pocahontas to speak directly to her people. According to English reports, she reproached her father for valuing material goods over her safety, and declared that she preferred life among the colonists, whom she said treated her with affection. This moment marked a turning point in the conflict and preceded the temporary peace that would follow shortly afterward. According to Mattapony oral tradition, Pocahontas was first married to a man named Kokum, who was said to be the brother of the Potawatomi leader Japazaws. In this tradition, Kokum is remembered as Pocahontas's husband at the time of her capture in 1613. The story holds that after Pocahontas was taken by the English, Kokum was killed by colonists, an event that further deepened the rupture between her life among her people and her forced separation from them. Within this account, Pocahontas and Kokum are also believed to have had a daughter named Kaoki, who remained with the Potawatomi people and was raised by them following her father's death and her mother's removal from their community. Among present-day Potawatomi descendants, this tradition remains an important part of their historical memory. Kaoki is remembered as a living continuation of Pocahontas's lineage within Native society, representing a life path that remained rooted in Algonquian culture rather than crossing into the English colonial world. In this telling, Pocahontas's story does not end with her capture and later marriage to an Englishman, but continues through her child, whose upbringing took place entirely among her mother's people. At the same time, the figure of Kokum has long been the subject of debate among historians. His identity, role, and even his existence are uncertain in the surviving English records. The only written reference to a man named Kokum appears in a brief statement from around 1616, in which William Strachey noted that Pocahontas had been living as the wife of a private captain called Kokum for approximately 2 years. This short remark has generated centuries of discussion, as it stands alone without further explanation or supporting detail, because Pocahontas's documented marriage to John Rolfe took place in 1614, and because no other English sources clearly mention a prior husband. Some historians have questioned Strachey's account. One theory suggests that Strachey may have been referring not to a Powhatan man at all, but to Rolfe himself, and that the reference was later misunderstood or misinterpreted as describing a native officer within Powhatan's hierarchy. Others argue that the absence of English records does not necessarily invalidate native oral tradition, particularly given how selectively colonial writers recorded indigenous lives. As with much of Pocahontas's biography, the story of Kokum exists in the space between written colonial accounts and oral indigenous memory. The uncertainty surrounding his life reflects the broader challenges of reconstructing her early years, where fragments of documentation, cultural misunderstanding, and the passage of time have left much open to interpretation. During her confinement at Henricus, Pocahontas came to know John Rolfe, an English settler whose own life had already been shaped by loss and uncertainty. Rolfe had previously been married to an Englishwoman named Sarah Hacker, and they had a child together. Both his wife and child died during the journey to Virginia after their ship, the Sea Venture, was wrecked in the Summer Isles, later known as Bermuda. After eventually reaching Virginia, Rolfe established a plantation called Varina Farms, where he focused on cultivating a new strain of tobacco that would later become economically important to the colony. Rolfe was known among the colonists as a deeply religious man, thoughtful and introspective, and he struggled internally over the idea of marrying a native woman. He viewed Pocahontas through the lens of English Christian morality and worried about the spiritual implications of such a union. By the time he contemplated marriage, however, Pocahontas had already been instructed in Christianity, baptized, and given the Christian name Rebecca. Rolfe believed this conversion carried great significance, both spiritually and symbolically. Before proceeding, Rolfe wrote a long and carefully worded letter to the colonial governor requesting formal permission to marry her. In the letter, he emphasized that his intentions were not driven by physical desire alone, but by what he described as higher purposes. He spoke of his affection for Pocahontas, of his hope that their marriage would benefit the colony, honor England, and bring glory to God. He framed the union as an act that would contribute to the stability of the plantation and, in his own words, to the salvation of both their souls. His writing revealed a man torn between emotion, faith, and duty, portraying his feelings as something that had long entangled his thoughts and weighed heavily on his conscience. The marriage took place on April 5, 1614, and was conducted by the chaplain Richard Buck, most likely at Jamestown. Following the ceremony, Pocahontas and Rolfe lived together at Varina Farms, located across the James River from Henricus. Their life there unfolded quietly, away from the center of the settlement. In January 1615, Pocahontas gave birth to their son, Thomas, marking the beginning of a small family rooted between two cultures. The union had broader consequences beyond their household. It ushered in a period of relative calm between the English settlers at Jamestown and the Powhatan peoples. This truce lasted for several years and became known as the Peace of Pocahontas. During this time, relations between the groups improved noticeably. Trade resumed, communication became more regular, and tensions that had previously defined daily life in the colony were eased. Contemporary observers noted that friendly exchanges extended not only with Powhatan himself, but also with surrounding communities under his influence. Despite these outcomes in Virginia, the marriage was viewed with discomfort by many in England. Within the rigid social hierarchy of the English court, the idea that an English commoner had married a woman widely portrayed as a princess was controversial. To some, it challenged expectations of class, race, and empire. Even so, for a brief period, the marriage stood as a rare moment of stability in an otherwise fragile and uncertain colonial world. One of the central aims of the London Company was the conversion of native peoples to Christianity, and they quickly recognized the symbolic value of Pocahontas's baptism and marriage to John Rolfe. Her conversion was presented as evidence that the English presence in Virginia was not only profitable, but divinely justified. At the same time, her marriage helped bring an end to the First Anglo-Powhatan War, offering a rare period of stability in a fragile colony. Seeing an opportunity to attract further investment and public support, the company decided to bring Pocahontas to England as a living symbol of the success of the Virginia experiment and of what they portrayed as the transformation of the New World. Pocahontas, Rolfe, and their young family arrived at the port of Plymouth on June 12, 1616. From there, they traveled by coach to London, accompanied by a small group of Powhatan people, including a religious figure named Tomocomo, whose role was partly observational and ceremonial. While Pocahontas was still in Plymouth, she learned that John Smith, whom she had been told was dead years earlier, was alive and living in London. Smith did not immediately meet her, but he wrote to Queen Anne, urging that Pocahontas be treated with dignity and respect as an honored guest. He warned that mistreatment could undo her goodwill toward England and Christianity and might jeopardize English ambitions in Virginia. Once in London, Pocahontas was introduced to English society and attended a number of formal gatherings. On January 5, 1617, she and Tomocomo were presented at the Palace of Whitehall during a performance of Ben Jonson's masque, The Vision of Delight. The encounter with King James himself was understated. According to later accounts, The king made so little impression that neither Pocahontas nor Tomokomo realized they had been in the monarch's presence until it was explained to them afterward. Although Pocahontas was not a princess according to Powhatan political customs, the London Company deliberately framed her as one for an English audience. Because she was the daughter of a powerful chief whom the English viewed as an emperor-like ruler, they believed it appropriate to elevate her status. A widely circulated engraving described her as Matawaka, also called Rebecca, daughter of the most powerful prince of the Powhatan Empire of Virginia. To many English observers, Powhatan was understood as a king, and his daughter was therefore treated according to English ideas of royal lineage. Smith himself referred to Powhatan as a king in his correspondence, reinforcing this image. Contemporary writers recalled that Pocahontas carried herself with calm dignity and composure, leaving an impression consistent with the role she had been assigned. During her time in London, Pocahontas was generally treated with courtesy. At public entertainments, she was given favorable seating, and members of the clergy and nobility hosted her with notable ceremony. Bishop John King, in particular, was said to have received her with exceptional formality, exceeding even the hospitality he usually showed to English ladies of rank. Not everyone, however, viewed her as royalty. Some observers regarded her more as an object of curiosity than as a noblewoman. To them, she represented Virginia itself, foreign, unfamiliar, and fascinating, but not truly royal. Her presence was interpreted through multiple lenses at once: symbol, convert, ambassador, and spectacle. For part of their stay, Pocahontas and Rolfe lived in Brentford, on the outskirts of London, and also spent time at Rolfe's family home in Norfolk. Early in 1617, Pocahontas and John Smith were reunited at a social gathering. Smith later recorded that when she first saw him, she turned away without speaking and covered her face, remaining withdrawn for several hours. When they eventually spoke, her words, as Smith recorded them, were indirect and layered with meaning. She reminded him of the kindnesses she had once shown him in Virginia and spoke of promises exchanged between him and her father. She then addressed Smith as father, explaining that since he had once called Powhatan father, the same bond should apply between them. Smith resisted this form of address, arguing that she outranked him as a king's daughter. Pocahontas responded firmly, questioning whether he had not brought fear to her people when he entered her father's land, and declaring that she would continue to call him father regardless. In doing so, she defined the relationship on her own terms, binding him symbolically to her people and her country. Before parting, Pocahontas told Smith that her people had long believed him dead, but that her father had sent Tomokomo to seek him out because, as she said, Englishmen were known to speak falsely. Her words, recorded imperfectly and filtered through Smith's perspective, remain among the most enigmatic moments of her story, quiet, restrained, and open to interpretation. In March 1617, John Rolfe and Pocahontas prepared to leave England and return to Virginia. They boarded a ship and began their journey down the River Thames, intending to cross the Atlantic and resume life in the colony they had left behind. However, the voyage was cut short. The ship had reached only as far as Gravesend when Pocahontas suddenly became gravely ill. She was taken ashore, where her condition rapidly worsened. She died there, at approximately 21 years of age, an event that was described at the time as deeply mourned by those around her. The precise cause of Pocahontas's death was never recorded, and it remains uncertain. Over time, various possibilities have been suggested, including pneumonia, smallpox, tuberculosis, severe intestinal disease, or poisoning. no definitive conclusion can be reached. According to Rolfe's account, Pocahontas accepted her condition calmly and spoke of the inevitability of death. He later recalled that she said it was enough for her that her child would live on. Pocahontas was buried on March 21, 1617, in the parish of St. George's Church in Gravesend. Her funeral was held according to English Christian rites, marking the final stage of a life that had crossed cultural, political, and religious boundaries. Her grave is believed to lie beneath the church's chancel, though the original building was destroyed by fire in 1727, and the exact location of her remains is no longer known. In later years, Pocahontas's death far from her homeland became an enduring part of her story. In 1958, she was commemorated in Gravesend with a life-sized bronze statue placed in the churchyard of St. George's. The statue is a replica of an earlier sculpture created in 1907 for Jamestown, Virginia. Together, these memorials reflect how her life and death came to symbolize a brief and fragile moment of connection between two very different worlds. Pocahontas and John Rolfe had one child together, a son named Thomas Rolfe, who was born in January 1615 during the early years of their marriage. Thomas was still very young when his mother died in England in 1617. After her death, he remained in England for much of his childhood, separated from his father and from the land of his birth. When he reached adulthood, Thomas eventually returned to Virginia, where he became part of colonial society and established his own family. Thomas Rolfe married a woman named Jane Poythress. Together they had a daughter, also named Jane Rolfe, who was born on October 10, 1650, at Varina, in what is now Henrico County, Virginia. Jane Rolfe later married Robert Bowling, a planter from the region that is now Prince George County, Virginia. Through this marriage, Pocahontas's lineage became intertwined with several prominent colonial families. Jane Rolfe and Robert Bowling had a son named John Bowling, born in 1676. John Bowling married Mary Kennan, and together they had 6 children who survived into adulthood. Each of these children married and went on to have families of their own, extending Pocahontas's descendants across generations. Through these family lines, many people in the United States today trace ancestry back to Pocahontas, making her one of the most widely cited Native American ancestors in American genealogy. Long after her death, Pocahontas continued to occupy a place in American memory and symbolism. In 1907, she became the first Native American woman to be honored on a United States postage stamp, reflecting her lasting presence in the national imagination. In 2000, she was included in the inaugural class of Virginia Women in History, recognizing her significance in the state's early past. In July 2015, the Pamunkey tribe received federal recognition, becoming the first native tribe in Virginia to be formally acknowledged by the United States government. The Pamunkey people are descendants of the Powhatan chiefdom, the political and cultural alliance to which Pocahontas belonged. Her legacy also extends into modern popular culture, as she is recorded as the 12th great-grandmother of American actor Edward Norton. Through history, memory, and lineage, Pocahontas remains a figure whose life continues to echo quietly across centuries. Pocahontas lived a life shaped by worlds colliding, a child of the Powhatan people, a bridge between cultures, and a witness to the earliest fragile moments of English settlement in Virginia. Her story was brief, but its echoes carried far beyond her lifetime, passed down through family lines, retold in histories, and reshaped by memory and myth. She was not a symbol by choice, but a human being navigating unfamiliar languages, beliefs, and expectations, carrying quiet courage through uncertain days. Tonight, as her story gently comes to rest, We leave her not as legend or icon, but as a young woman who lived, adapted, loved, and endured during a time of great change. The river grows still, the voices fade, and the past settles into silence. Let your thoughts slow, your breathing soften, and your mind drift peacefully away. Thank you for listening to Boring Biography. May your rest be deep, your dreams gentle, and your night calm. Good night.